Not all ghosts and apparitions have their origins hundreds of years ago. There are some phantoms that belong to this century, and in some cases, to this decade. In 1962, a Mr. Ronald Collins, a musician from the Midlands, was returning home. He had intended to catch the last train, having spent the evening playing in a local village pub.
Unfortunately, having been persuaded to have one last drink for the road, I'd arrived at the station just in time to watch the last train pull away from the platform. I lived 10 miles away, and with no chance of finding a taxi at such a late hour, I was faced with the daunting prospect of having to walk home in the dark or spend the night in the freezing, cheerless waiting room until the next train at 5 a.m. I decided the quickest way would be to walk home along the tracks, as this was the most direct route. Although it was a fine night, it was very dark, and as I cautiously walked along the tracks, I stumbled a few times. However, after walking for over an hour, my enthusiasm started to wear off. I was becoming very tired and my feet were getting sore. Up until now, the tracks had run in an almost straight line. But then I came to a spot where the track curved at an acute angle. I noticed on the other side of the track there was a signal box. I thought I would rest there for a while before continuing. Although the box appeared empty, I knocked on the door a couple of times, then entered. Inside it was pitch black. There was a stuffy, mouldy smell in the room. I lit a match. I found a torch laying on a table and tried it. It was still working. I looked around to try and find somewhere to sit. In the corner of the room was an old leather armchair. I checked my watch, and also there was an old clock on the wall, thinking that I would allow myself 15 minutes or so to rest and have a cigarette. I remember noticing how still the place seemed. There wasn't a sound of life anywhere, apart from the occasional hoot of an owl in a nearby tree. I must have started to doze off to sleep for a while, because I was suddenly startled by an approaching noise which made me jump. I could hear footsteps on the gravel outside of the box. I looked out and I could see a figure approaching, holding a lantern. A blue, eerie light seemed to engulf the signal box. The sound of the footsteps got louder until they could be heard climbing the steps outside the box. Suddenly the door flew open and in walked a porter carrying a lantern. To my astonishment, the porter did not appear to notice me, but just sat down on the bench and fell asleep. I thought about trying to sneak past him without being seen, which I was just about to do, when I heard the distant sound of a train approaching. I couldn't work out which train it could be. I knew there wasn't one due until 5 in the morning. I checked my watch and the clock, thinking perhaps I'd been asleep for a long time. It was only 12 o'clock. The faint grumble of the train got louder and louder. It was obviously approaching at speed. As the train flashed past the box, I was startled by a noise. The porter jumped up and rushed across to the levers, frantically pushing them back. From the immediate darkness outside came an awful tearing and crashing noise, accompanied by wild shrieks of agony that rang out through the still air of the dark night. Then came an almighty crash, shaking the earth. Then silence. I rushed to the window, but I couldn't see anything. And the room was empty. No signs of the porter anywhere. I realised then what I'd experienced. The ghostly reenactment of some great rail disaster. Grabbing my case, I ran out of the door and tore down the steps of the signal box and out onto the track. I didn't stop running till I reached home.
Collins was right. He had experienced a haunting. 10 years before, a signalman had fallen asleep at his job after working a long shift. He had awoken just in time to see the Birmingham Express hurtle past too fast for the bend. The train had leapt the curve and was smashed to smithereens, more than 20 people dying outright in the carnage. Overwhelmed with remorse and not daring to face the consequences, the signalman had retired to his box whilst the emergency services were at work below. He closed the door and slit his throat.